So thank you. I come from I'm a genetic epidemiologist. I come from a background of cohort studies. And so in my role at Sutter Health, I'm shepherding a large healthcare system into this world that you're all creating in precision medicine. And it's quite an odyssey. And so it's been a good partnership with DNAnexus. And I'm going to go through our experience creating a study as a test case for doing large-scale precision medicine research like you are all engaged in. To set the stage, I really want to emphasize why this is important. So multiple sclerosis is a disease that affects about 1 million people in the US, 2.5 million people worldwide. There are things we understand about it being a higher incidence in women, and it varies dramatically by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And this is why precision medicine in multiple sclerosis is really important, because there are different disease subtypes. The most common is the relapsing remitting. If anybody knows somebody with multiple sclerosis, it's probably this type where symptoms come and go over time. There's a more progressive version where after those symptoms come and go, there's a straight trajectory to complete disability and death. And then there's a very devastating form called primary progressive, which starts and is rapid progression to disability and death. And there's no way to tell any of these apart with any tools, genomic, bioinformatic, anything like that. So when a patient is diagnosed, they don't know which one of these paths they're on. To date, there are about 17 medications that have been developed as disease-modifying therapies, and they all have various effectiveness and toxicity profiles. So again, a patient doesn't know which one is the right choice for them when they are diagnosed. This is another need in the field. And there have been a lot of global case control GWAS type studies of multiple sclerosis, which have identified a large number of risk variants. But this being an autoimmune disease, all those risk variants are in the HLA region, and HLA lights up for a lot of diseases, not just autoimmune diseases. And so that doesn't really advance the ability to predict disease subtype, progression, ability to identify the right treatment for a patient at the right time. And so there are a lot of gaps in what we, how we can advance research in this field. Hence, the partnership we've developed with DNAnexus. And the biggest, I think, gaps here are not in sample size, because these huge global GWAS are based on tens of thousands of people, and we don't have the answer. So I think the answer lies in the data meaning the real-world evidence, real-world data, clinical data collected on individual patients over long periods of times, and being able to apply deeper genetic technologies like exome or whole genome sequencing to these rich data sets. Because it's that completeness which is where I think we're going to find at least some of the answers, or at least move the field forward. And so as part of this partnership, I'm representing Sutter Health. And Sutter Health is a large, not-for-profit healthcare system that is present in Northern California. We have a patient population of about 3.5 million patients, actually. And so if you think about it, it's like 1% of the US population. And Northern California, and if you look at our footprint here, this is one of the most diverse places in the world, and our healthcare system represents that diversity, and I'll show that with some of our data later in the talk. We also have a rich diversity of disease outcomes from early stage to late stage, and even though we aren't necessarily a research institute like a lot of you come from, or like our neighbors like UCSF or Stanford, we still have more clinical trials in those places combined. We have access to really amazing patient and data resources. And finally, we have one instance of Epic across the system, which goes back about 10 years. So as the talk earlier that discussed, this is where I think the discoveries are going to be made, is in these types of healthcare systems with diverse populations that have lots of data available. So that's why we have a partnership. And so the partnership between Sutter Health and DNAnexus for multiple sclerosis has some very important team players here. All of our whole exome sequencing is being done at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. All of the retrospective and prospective longitudinal follow-up is being handled by our team at Sutter Health. And that also includes a wealth of imaging data on these patients, because imaging is now the way that MS is tracked, not so much through spinal taps and things like that. So all of these data then are going to be integrated on the DNAnexus platform for discovery, partnering, and future research. So for the MS study, we have about 3,000 patients in total across Sutter. And that might seem quaint to some people who have large studies or dealing with the UK Biobank, but this sample size is going to be emboldened and strengthened by the depth of clinical data that we're bringing to this study. So remember, these large GWAS studies they've made progress, but we're going to go beyond that progress with the depth of clinical data we bring to it. We're going to enroll up to 1,000 of these patients across 10 clinics in our healthcare center. And so these are all neurology clinics that start in Santa Cruz and kind of make their way all up through the peninsula, East Bay, and out past Sacramento. So that helps us capture a lot of the racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and disease diversity that we expect to see in a large healthcare system. And these are things you don't usually see in academic medical centers, because they're seeing the sickest people, the wealthiest people, and the whitest people usually. And so we're going to see the diversity of disease here. And so our study visit protocol, and remember, we've established this in partnership with DNAnexus. We weren't going to do this study, we weren't going to do this research unless we had this collaboration. And so using our existing clinical staff, our clinical teams, which do have experience in the neurology sites to do this work, we first start with using Epic to identify our eligible patients. Remember, a decade's worth of Epic on everybody, one instance, so we know who our MS patients are, we know where they see their doctors, and we know their clinical histories. So then we can visit them in the clinic, consent them, blood is sent to UPMC, we have in-depth patient and physician questionnaires, which are fed through REDCap and fed into DNAnexus, as well as an EDSS, which is a disability assessment, which is typical for multiple sclerosis. So this is everything happening in the clinic. Over time, what we can do is integrate retrospective data capture going back as far as 10 years, in as much as patients have that much data historically. And this includes full data capture on all electronic health record, not just MS history. This includes MRIs and brain imaging, any comorbidities and other visits, but also prospectively, we can continue to update changes in treatment, any other medical conditions that come up along the way. And I don't want to minimize how difficult this process is. And so we're collecting over 300 data elements retrospectively and longitudinally in these large kind of buckets of data, whether it's demographics, medical history, imaging data, prescription and medication history, all of these things here, which sit in our Epic system, which sit in electronic medical records. Some of it has to come from physician and patient questionnaires, and some of it's from MRI data, and these all sit in different places and need to be brought together. Before we do any genetics whatsoever, we need to bring this together, and while we can access these things, we are learning, we're in the early stages of trying to format and provide a data set that not only can provide valuable insights on the DNAnexus platform, but allow us to share across studies with other healthcare systems or data from other countries even, and also allow us to then find partners to license the data for discovery. And so that ability to, OMOP and FHIR and SNOMED and Alphabet Soup, all of our data is something that we're just learning, and the DNAnexus team has been teaching us how to do that. So that's incredibly valuable, because at the end of the day, this is the data set that we can use for discovery, and we wouldn't be doing it without this work. So here's some preliminary data on our first 18 patients. Yay, we have data in the system. You can see that our patients are about half white and Caucasian and about a third African American, with other races represented. At age of consent, broken up by 20-year blocks. We have patients that are, in kind of younger, mid, and higher ages. Females, we're about 2.5 to 1 in males, so that's an expected ratio. What's interesting here is of the 10 patients that we've actually confirmed disease subtype in, half of them are the primary progressive, the rare version. So we're already generating an overrepresentation of this group, which is really critical, actually, because this is the group that is the most impacted by the disease and the hardest to study. So we're already finding that we can get these patients into our study. And if you look at the medications, this is kind of a who's who of all the MS medications. This is what we would expect in people who have advanced disease. So we're able to capture those data and characterize them. And what's interesting here is that our patients have an average of 7.5 years in the system, ranging anywhere from about 1 to 11 years. So we have a lot of data history on these patients. And then finally, it's not just what we're getting out of the MS neurology clinics, but we're capturing healthcare utilization and comorbidities across all practices. And all of these diagnoses reflect real-world comorbidities that these patients are experiencing. So this has all come in already on our first 18 patients, and when we scale to 1,000, this is going to be a remarkable resource. So finally, what is it that's, what is Sutter Health interest in this? Well, when we contribute samples to this data set, we get back an integrated clinico-genomic data set that we can use for discovery, but then also can be licensed out to pharmaceutical companies or other companies that want to do discovery on this data set. And that investment helps us recover costs and generate revenue that goes back into building a program. So revenue is not a bad word. We are just partners in this. We're not selling the data. We're not turning over all the samples. We are partners in this, and this revenue helps us grow a program, and that is completely acceptable to our system. And I always have to, kind of move past this to remember that why we're doing this. And so I try and remind myself all the time of why we're doing this. Because if you ask a physician or if you ask a patient why this is important, a physician will tell you because there are no biomarkers to understand MS prognosis or response to medications. So the physicians are kind of flying blind, and they're doing their best. And a more precise understanding of MS will help them predict the disease and prescribe more effective medications. So this is really important to our healthcare system and to our physicians. And finally, this is a direct quote from a patient in our study. For many MS patients, existing drugs are minimally effective. As this disease progresses, little by little, you lose yourself to the illness. And we can't forget this when we're doing this research. So it's not just about VCF files or processing speeds. It's about people and finding the right treatments for them. And this is why we're doing it. And this just goes to the partnerships we have with our physicians and with our patients who are engaged in this research. So I thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this, and want to just acknowledge the Sutter Health team, our patients and our clinical staff and our physicians who I've already mentioned, and our partnership with our IRB and OGC and privacy and operations people. And although they can be a huge pain, they make sure we do it right and protect our patients. And of course, the support of DNAnexus and all of the great information and help you've given us. So thanks for bringing us into this world. I really appreciate it.